just talking with your patients, saying, where do you work? What do you do? Who could I talk to so I can better understand what you do, so I can help you get better faster and be safe when you go back to work, and that you have full confidence in going back to what your job was.
I'm Kevin from Metriks. I've certified thousands of healthcare professionals in functional capacity evaluations and helped them unlock new revenue streams by integrating functional testing services into their business. I'm here to share some practical insights, proven strategies to help you grow your business and deliver excellent services. Imagine offering a service that not only helps injured workers get back on their feet, but also saves the employer time, money, and liability. Functional tests do just that. They are comprehensive, performance-based tests that objectively assess the worker's ability to perform job-related tasks. In today's competitive landscape, functional testing is not only a clinical tool, they're also revenue generators and bridge the gap between healthcare, workplace safety, and workers' compensation. All right. Good afternoon, Mike. Thanks for joining me here today. And what we wanted to talk about was implementing functional testing in your rehab clinic. So that's kind of where this conversation is going to go. So, Mike, why am I talking to you? Like, what kind of knowledge do you have in this space, Mike?
Well, I've been in the compensable injury management space for 25 years, 30 years, a long time. And so one thing I think with working with using functional testing is it allows you to use objective data to make more timely decisions. So if we're looking at adding functional testing into our practices, there's what we do clinically, and it doesn't change things really what we do clinically, but the objective data helps us make timely decisions. So whether it's an insurance company that wants to know that the treatment program is being effective, whether it's an employer trying to return people to work, the objective functional testing provides that objective evidence to see if our program is working.
But why should I believe you, Mike?
Why should you believe me? Yeah.
Why should I believe you? What experience do you actually? I know you're telling me, but what? Can you talk? Can you talk a little? Just tell me a little bit more about your experience. What kind of got you to this point?
I mentioned the 30 years of compensable injury management. I started from scratch my own division within a large company, where I worked with ultimately worked with enterprise customers. So large customers like National Postal Services, National Airlines, automotive assembly such as Chrysler, Ford, GM, ExxonMobil, Amazon, companies and organizations like that. Where I started though was, every $500 contract I got was important, and I kept talking about moving the decimal point. Can I take $500 to $5,000 to $50,000 to $500,000 to $5 million? And so I worked in a large company, had about 13,000 employees, and I left that about 6 years ago. Said somebody else can do the $50 million contract, and then started working with digital health startup companies, and then started my own consulting business about 2 years ago. And where I spend most of my time now is helping mostly healthcare companies in the areas of business development, and a lot of that has to do with employer services. How do we provide services to employers that are of value to them? Because that's where my experience has been for 25 years.
So if I rewind and think about what you just told me, you did start at nothing or close to nothing. Like you said you started from scratch. So before you started, the company that you work with did not have weren't offering these services?
They weren't offering the services at all. I worked in a physiotherapy clinic as a clinical kinesiologist, seeing patients that were referred to me by the physical therapist for a therapeutic exercise. I liked being out in industry, so when I often worked from noon to 8, so I'd go in the morning and go for visits to these workplaces, so I could understand how I could design the work hardening programs using exercise for these people. And as I chatted with them, they had these requirements and these needs. And so kind of the funny thing that happened was because I'd been around the organization for a while. By the time I did that, I developed a functional capacity, an FCE or an FAE protocol for the organization. They didn't have that at all. And then the other interesting part is because I'd been around for a while and people knew me, I started taking some of the more senior people out of the clinic to do functional testing or go out and do some ergonomic assessments, to do those sorts of things. And the CEO of the company came to me and said, Mike, are you taking people out of the clinic? Yes. Are you disrupting continuity of care? Yes. Are you going to stop? No. And he had this kind of, I can't do it, but kind of this raised eyebrow thing. He said, I'm not sure whether I'm going to support you or fire you. And so came back to me a few days later, and again, really starting from nothing. It was eat what I could kill. So I was the one going out, securing the work, doing it. And within a matter of about 3 months, I had more work than I could do. And I probably put that out of order. That's when I started using the people from the clinical network to do the work for me. And that's where I started to disrupt the continuity of care, because people would leave the clinic for a half a day or a day at a time and weren't seeing people for therapeutic exercise, as I explained before.
Can we just rewind like just a little bit there? I mean, I love that story. I love the idea of a younger version of Mike working in a clinic as a kinesiologist. I feel like I missed a step though. Like you said, yeah, because I can imagine that part, because I think that's gonna resonate with the kinesiologists who are working there. It's going to even resonate with a chiropractor or a physical therapist who's working in clinic all the time. But you mentioned that you spent some of your time with the employer. I guess my question is how did that part happen? Like, how did you actually you just sort of you skipped over something, I think, in that.
Yeah.
How did you get that how did you, the very first time, how did that happen?
Just talking with your patients, saying, where do you work? What do you do? Who could I talk to so I can better understand what you do, so I can help you get better faster and be safe when you go back to work, and that you have full confidence in going back to what your job was. And because it wasn't really endorsed, I'll say, and it wasn't frowned upon, but it wasn't endorsed. I mentioned I was working from noon to 8. So if I was going to do this, I would just go in before I started my shift, and I would go in and visit with the employer and talk to people and better understand what the job was, and then I'd come back and put up a program to get
that was endorsed by the rehab company you work for, or were you getting paid for that, or you're just doing that you're
So I think it's a lot better. I wasn't getting paid for it. I was going out on my own time to understand what the requirements of the worker were, so I could do an exercise program. That really was what my justification was at the time. But while I'm out there chatting, I'm understanding that there's other things that these employers need. And almost all of it came down to functional testing to make more timely decisions.
Okay. All right. So you actually were like a true trailblazer, is what it's sounding like to me. You are employed. You decide, I don't have enough information, or I want more information. I'm not going to ask my employer to pay me, because that's just too complicated. And I'm going to be a true entrepreneur and just go out, and I'm going to do it as a loss leader or whatever. Just, education, I believe, never hurts anybody. So you go out, you talk to your patients, you find an employer. How do you, okay, that's cool, but how do you who do you call at the employer to make, let's just even thinking about that, Mike, before we kind of go to the other one. How did you make that first phone call, and what are you asking them to come and do?
Well, I think that first phone call was usually to the person's supervisor, the person responsible for this person coming back to work. And the one thing that I found out very quickly was that as clinicians, and this isn't appropriate, this is the right thing to do in my opinion, but as clinicians, we tend to recommend modified duties.
Okay.
Which is necessary for that person to get back to work. And we'll see lots of literature that supports that whole modified or transitional return to work program. But the feeling from the employer is goes on too long. It's a pain in the bum. because I have to manage all the administration that goes along with this. And so, what would help? What would help you? Well, if I really knew what the person was safely able to do. So I just don't have them coming in and reading manuals. We'll see some of those strategies to reduce lost time. If there's no lost time, you can significantly control your compensation costs, but it doesn't add value to the organization. So that can only go on for a certain period of time. So if you could shorten the duration of that modified work, that would really be of interest to me. Most people are going to have non-threatening musculoskeletal injuries. They should get back to their regular job at some point in time. There's going to be a few that have a traumatic injury, and they're always going to have to be probably accommodated partially or fully. But most people are going to get back to their regular job. How do we allow that to happen in a safe manner as quickly as possible from the employer's perspective? How do we get these people back so that they can be productive in my company again? And if I'm going to do modified work, I'd like it to be progressive. I'd like it to have value.
Okay. Now, not to be unrealistic, but it sounds like the supervisor you just described was a superstar, and I can't imagine that every single supervisor, first few supervisors, were as educated as you are putting that description out.
Yeah.
What would be like sort of a maybe more average or run of the mill? I go and speak to the supervisor of the person, like what kind of information does that supervisor have, and like how forthcoming are they with you? Are they interested in speaking to you? Like, just tell me a little bit more about that meeting with that, regular average supervisor.
Well, and a lot of those supervisors initially don't want the person back until they're 100%.
Okay.
So that's like, I think, you've heard that, Kevin, through your years in doing this. I don't want them back unless they're 100%, because my job is to make widgets. And if we're not making widgets, or we're slowed down making widgets, that's not good for me, because that's how that person gets measured. But also, if people aren't able to be there, then you can't make widgets. So ultimately that's going to impact on their productivity, because they got to bring a new person in. They've got to train them. They've got to train them, or they've got to find them. They've got to onboard them. So kind of talking about some of those other practical things and those burdens, like this is why we do this, because all this other stuff is over there. I think one thing that clinicians don't appreciate probably well enough when they're talking to an employer is that they can think of wage replacement. If it's a workers' compensation claim, they get the idea that the person has to be paid. They understand there's medical costs. They understand there's rehab costs. But the soft costs, or the administrative costs, or the indirect costs are typically 5 to 10 times what those direct costs are.
Okay.
So understanding that and asking questions, like you're right, people would say 100%. Well, why? That doesn't make any sense. Like, here's where I'm coming from as a clinician. It just doesn't make sense. And, I have a big sport background, or enjoy sport anyway. Thought I was an athlete at one point in time. But if you think of somebody playing professional sport that gets injured, they don't go from resting for 4 weeks to going back into a game. There's going to be some stretching exercises. There's going to be some rehab they do. There's going to be some drills. There's going to be some, individual getting back on the field of action. There's going to be some scrimmages. And then they're going to go back to the game. And I was working a lot in manufacturing, and a lot of the people understood sport. So trying to get ways that they could understand that here's what I'm trying to do. So was it easy? No, but you just keep at it, trying to understand why they want people to be 100%. It's not realistic. Like, clinically, I know it's not going to work if I keep this person for 4 or 5 or 6 weeks and then release them and hope for the best.
Okay. So let's just maybe wrap up this supervisor piece a little bit. But how open were they? So, you say, they say 100%, you say that's not really feasible. Like, how open were they to meeting with you within in the middle and actually developing modified duties that would eventually go away? What was their appetite for that?
The appetite was pretty good, Kevin, because they understood from a probably from an HR level or somebody was pushing down on them that lost time costs us money. So you need to bring these people back. So they had an understanding they needed to do that. Why, they weren't really sure, because they're not 100%. I'm not making widgets. But so there was some pressure. And if they didn't quite get it, then I was just asking questions of, can I talk to your HR manager? Can I talk to the CEO, depending on the size of the organization, so that I could be. Now, this didn't develop overnight. I started doing this and then didn't start my division of the company, my own segment of the company. Probably was 3 or 4 years until I got to that point where I had, 50 people working for me and going out and doing all these things.
Yeah, but I mean, 50 people is probably not what my average physical therapy company is thinking about in terms of their hiring practice. So we're probably not going to need a runway that's 3 or 4 years long.
No.
So I think if we're looking for a modest, good utilization of some of my clinical staff, my kinesiologist or my physical therapy assistant, I can probably ramp that up in much shorter time. I'm interested, kind of like taking a little, I love this idea of, not, I start my marketing literally in my clinic. My patient's already there. I'm talking to my patient, but I have to assume that if your patient is, working at a very small employer with 1 or 2 employees, this is probably not something that is going to work for men. Is that a fair statement?
Well, probably a fair statement. If a smaller company will be impacted by that one person being off more than a larger company will be.
Okay.
If one person goes, there's 10% of the workforce gone. Right? That's impactful. So, that there was a good opportunity to do something that would help get that person back. Now, from a business perspective, yeah, that was, a one-off, and they may not have an injury for a period of time. So, I think a lot of it is with small manufacturing to start with. Is it somebody's got 50, 100, 50, 100.
Sorry. I jumped in there. What was the number? What was
like there's, and I'd have to do some, can't quote stats out, but there's tens of thousands of employers that have 50 employees that want to do something, right, to get that person back to work. You don't need to, go to, a large employer that's got 1,000 or 5,000 employees. The selling cycle of convincing somebody that's that large and thanks to that sophisticated may just takes a long period of time. So yeah, probably not tens, but there's lots of work with maybe hundreds of good target to look at, 100 employees.
Okay. I mean, because I'll be honest, when you first started talking, I started to get a little bit of a sweat on, and I heard the Exxon Mobil's and the big corporations, and I started thinking, well, like, how many small physical therapy or even mid-sized physical therapy operations are going to tackle something that large? Now I'm much more in tune with this idea that if we could be looking at a 50 to 100 person operation, that would be a way for us to, when we're talking to our, I sort of think about, marketing stuff, I guess, a little bit, and what you and I talk about sometimes is that qualified lead idea. If we're trying to qualify our leads a little bit, we don't necessarily want to be chasing, every, if we think about that most of our patients are going to have employers, we're not going to be chasing all of those employers. So I was thinking size. So size-wise, we're saying 50 to 100. Is there like types of businesses that you would say are going to be more? I know you mentioned the word manufacturing. Was there any other types of businesses that if I'm trying to qualify the people that I'm going to spend time on?
Yeah, well, where there's going to be injuries and an appetite for doing something. So, just before I answer that question, Kevin, even something that's, $500 to do an education program on injury prevention goes a long way with some of those smaller employers, because Bob got injured and we could do an educational program. And from that educational program, it could be, what could we do to improve this? We could have a physical demands analysis done, which will be functional testing, or we could do post-offer employment test or pre-employment screening to make sure the people that we're hiring. So there's lots of things that come out of just creating dialogue. And now I forgot the questions you asked that I went off on a tangent. What was that again, Kevin?
Oh, that's really good.
The types of companies,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
The types of industries. So manufacturing, logistics. So any, whatever you want to call a warehouse type of, there's lots of those types of organization. Anything to do with deliveries. One of my favorite things is that we used to play when I had a small staff of who could get the most free stuff. Now that probably doesn't happen anymore, but one of my probably most precious memories is going around a small city that had a craft brewery delivering kegs of beer.
Okay.
So anything to do with deliveries is typically tough because often you're left with, and I guess my point of that was a trendy little bars that have, upstairs and downstairs, and you're moving these kegs of beer or half kegs of beer. You can't always make it to be, ideal because that's what, you got to deliver the beer to where that restaurant wants it. Not a nice loading dock, not bending your knees and keeping your back straight. What's real out there of how do we create a practical solution for that worker?
Okay. And, one of the things that we've sort of been mulling around is just kind of coming up with some real numbers here. So I just did a little bit of research, because one of the objections I might get from physical therapists would be, well, I think that market's already served. It's probably there's probably too much supply in the market. I don't need to go out. All right. It's not going to be worth my time to go out there and look at it. So I just looked at Houston, Texas, and we did 25 plus, and we can refine that search, but at 25 plus in a city of Houston, Texas, there was like 15,000 employers that are at that number. And we did then want to to drill down a little bit. That number gets lower when we start looking at the high risk industries, but we're still talking between 5 and 10,000 employers that are meeting those two thresholds. Thresholds for us, and that information is not like, if we can go by our patients, like that's a first step, but we can also do some online research to kind of give us I don't think we're going to get into workers' compensation rate costs and all that kind of thing. I think that's a topic for a different day. But that's where that information is coming from effectively, right? Is that the high risk employers are going to be known by these workers' compensation systems.
Well, and I don't know Houston all that well, but it sounds like you've been doing some research. Like, how many physical therapy clinics are there in Houston?
The physical therapy clinics
or physical rehabilitation, where chiropractic, physical therapy, those types of things.
I don't know that we got like an absolute number of the therapy clinics, but we definitely don't. I mean, the one thing that we saw was that less than 10% of those clinics were actually offering these kind of services, right? So it was I think maybe probably pretty similar to what you've seen in your experience in terms of.
Well, I was just gonna say that I don't know how many clinics there are, but every time I go to a city, there's lots of clinics. It's not hard to find clinics that provide services, and these are, good clinics. They're open. They've got clientele, but they focus a lot on, sports medicine or self-pay patients. And again, nothing wrong with that, but there is a demand and a need from insurers and employers to have objective data to make more timely decisions. Sound like a bit of a broken record now, but if I have objective data, then I can make a decision. I can decide that this person isn't getting better and I need to change the course of my treatment, that my treatment isn't working and I need to refer them on to see a medical specialist. There's a bunch of different things of that, but we expect people to get better.
Yeah. I mean, just throwing out a couple of other numbers, like, another way to look at it is like in in that area, you're looking at between like 50,000 and 100,000 workplace injuries every year in Houston, just as an idea. So like there's no there's no shortages of injuries.
And what, 65-70% of those are straightforward, non-threatening, or even higher than that probably.
Yeah. So so that I think stats and numbers are interesting for us to look at. We haven't really mentioned sort of revenue kind of things from it. I at least want to get that out there, that your short form FCEs are like $450, your long form FCEs are $950. So there is there's going to be return on the investment that you're going to see inside of here. I think the last thing that I wanted to kind of get across in this conversation was, we mentioned the supervisor, but there's other stakeholders. Like I listed some stakeholders on like the page 3 of the article that we're putting together here. Can you think about, and the conversations you might have had, like other than the supervisor, who else would you be speaking to at the employer?
Well, depending on the organization, one of the first people that you will end up chatting to if you're trying to return somebody back to work is a union representative.
Okay.
And I think a lot of people get intimidated by the union representative, and the union representative, they're there for the safety of the worker and the employee. I find it a lot easier talking to union reps than it used to be, because they were negotiating on, you didn't really see them, and then they were negotiating this is my opinion anyway, it just may not be fair, so my labor friends out there, but they were negotiating a lot on vacation time and wages and those sorts of things. Well, a lot of that is kind of taken care of itself now. People always want to make more money, but safety is a big part of it. And again, if I'm going to return somebody back to work, we want to make sure that they're safe. And again, that functional testing allows us and them to know that the person's able to come back safely, or they need more care. And it helps to solve some of those arguments that go on. More care, less care. Okay, let's use objective data again to make those decisions. Whether it's cutting them off, returning to work, that's not what I'm looking at. I'm looking at trying to get them back to work safely.
Okay. And then, like, if you were thinking about, say, the owner or the finance person, they would be another person that we could speak to. And like, if we wanted to think about, like we do in sales, maybe a little bit, their pain versus our offer, like, what would you say to, how would you frame the finance or the employer's pain point, and how would you frame your offer to that pain point?
Well, again, I always come back. I'm not, trying to keep things simple, that we're going to use objective data to help them with making decisions. But if I'm an employer, if I'm in finance or I'm the CEO, my objective is to make a profit at the end of the day. Okay. And so things that impact me on my profit will be, if somebody's injured, they can't make they can't make widgets or whatever I'm trying to do. So how do
it's productivity.
Well, it's productivity, but there's more than that. It's productivity.
Okay.
Productivity is more than just that individual worker, though. If that individual worker isn't able to come back safely, then I got to bring on a replacement worker. And there's a whole bunch of costs with recruiting that person and onboarding that person and training that person as part of that process. So all of that impacts
their
productivity. Yeah.
So their pain points are, like, to make it really simple, is dollars. But we define dollars in this situation as, I'm going to make less money because I love the widgets. I can't produce enough widgets anymore. And I'm going to spend more money because now I've got 2 people doing what one person used to do. So I'm paying out more money. I'm making less widgets, so I'm getting more money. So so there's their pain. What are you offering to them with these?
Well, and just before I get to that, Kevin, and then maybe they don't even can't even find enough skilled workers. So if somebody's off, now they get into breach of contract because they just can't produce enough widgets. They got a contract to do 1,000 widgets, and guess what? I need an electrician, or I need a tool and die person, and guess what? There's a shortage of those skilled trades right now. So I've got that stress coming as well, not just the dollar signs, but the dollar signs combined with unhappy customers that are threatening to take their business elsewhere. And that's not. So I'm offering that employer, looking at the direct costs. We can help prevent injuries from occurring. If somebody does get injured, we can then use objective functional testing to make decisions on what type of productive modified work they can do.
Okay.
And then I can bring them back to work sooner. I'm not sure what the average industrial wage is now. It's probably $400 or $500 per day, something along those lines. So that's a significant cost if I have to pay somebody that much money and bring somebody else in at that level of cost. I like to use something called internal profitability as well.
Oh, okay.
When I'm talking to CEOs and finance people. Now, they probably won't tell me this, but I'll ask them, what's your profit margin? They'll say, like, none of your business what my profit margin is. But let's assume it's 10%, I'll say. Probably 5%. So they're going, okay. So if it's 10%, that means that they have to sell 10 times whatever their expenses are on that to stay where they are. And so if I'm paying somebody to be off and I'm paying a replacement worker and that person doing modified work isn't doing productive work, you start adding all that up and multiply it by 10. That's how much they have to sell to have the same bottom line.
Okay. Amazing.
So it gets significant. I had a logistics, a warehouse at one point in time, and they had 10 people on modified duties.
Okay.
And I asked them what they did when these 10 people went on vacation. And they said, well, Mike, everybody's entitled to their vacation, to their holiday time. So when they leave, nobody replaces them. Nope, everybody's entitled to their vacation. What's the cost for you to pay these people, including their benefits? And they said, well, about $75,000. So that means you're paying 10 extra people, because if you don't have to replace them when they go away for 2 weeks of vacation, how productive is that work?
Yeah.
It may have controlled your compensation costs by having no lost time, but your productivity, so that's $750,000 of additional wages. Then I went on and said, well, are these people going to work here for a while? Yeah, they'll probably work here on those jobs, because if anybody stays in a modified job for more than 6 months, that's not their modified job. They think that's their new job. And
Right.
So how do you move them back to that perspective? And so in this particular case, people were in their early 40s. So if they're going to stay in that job, now this is a worst case scenario, and I don't think it could have went on that long, but 20 years, what's 750 times 20? That's $15 million. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
and multiply that by 10, because that's the profit margin. Well, then that's $150 million in sales you've got to make to offset those 10 unproductive workers. How many pieces of product do you need? How many toilets do you need to make? How many cars do you need to make $150 million? Can I help you with that?
all right. Well, I feel like for one conversation, we've hit on a lot of interesting topics, but we actually have stayed very much on topic, which was really just to sort of whet the appetite to say that A, there's lots of people who are injured. B, lots of companies aren't dealing with those injuries in a very efficient manner, and that efficiency we just learned from you really translates into a lot of dollars that maybe employers know but aren't really formulating in a true way in their mind. And and maybe this will help some therapists think a little bit differently about their return to work with their people, and consider the idea of adding this functional testing services and starting to reach out to employers just simply by talking to their patients in their clinic.
It's where it starts, right? Talking to the patients, having a conversation. The nice thing is it doesn't change what they're doing clinically. I mean, it does if they're going to add functional testing, but they regardless, they don't have to change what they're doing. They just need to change their messaging of whether they're talking to a supervisor or a union representative. Each of those people have a different need, but the functional testing doesn't change. It's the same functional testing. Objective data. No need to hide anything. It's like, here it is.
Here it is. Yeah. And maybe just as a closing note, I really did like this idea that like we don't have to start huge. We can start with the $50 service, and then we just keep adding our zeros. I love your analogy there. And then, then we go to the $500 service, and then, we see if we can build from there. So it's fantastic to catch up with you again today, Mike.
Always enjoyable, Kevin.
All right. And I look forward to our next conversation. And I think what I'd like to do next time is just, I really liked the idea of getting a better idea of who that supervisor was. And I think if we can create some avatars, which is what I like to call the description of those people. So if we can really understand the HR manager, understand the owner, understand the supervisor, understand the help, and really get a really nice picture. And I think that'll be a fun conversation for us to have next time. Okay.
Excellent.
All right.
Look forward to it, Kevin. Take care.
Right. Bye.
Bye now.